Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are talking about that really annoying little alert that you are probably seeing in your AdSense account that talks about the CCPA. And I'm going to just go into my computer, and it looks like this in my account. Are you seeing it? It says the Consumer Protection Privacy Act CCPA goes into effect January 1, 2020. Learn how to manage your options for users in California. I have seen this in my account. Probably longer than I would like to admit, and I have been ignoring it because it hasn't made me do anything about it, and it doesn't say that my earnings will be impacted by it. But today I was looking at it, it's like, oh, I should just try and figure out what's right. And then while I was kind of reading about it, I just decided to make a video and just tell you what I now know about it. And so I am doing a helpful slide presentation to keep myself organized, because if I just tried to do this off the cuff, I would be rambling literally for hours. So the point of having the slides here, which I don't think are that exciting, are to help you see the information if you're watching this, or if you decide to wander away and listen, you can come back and find the information here. I do have to give you the disclaimer that none of this in this whole video should constitute legal advice, okay? This is not me being your lawyer. This is not me telling you what to do. This is me reporting the information that I have found, and I'm telling you what I'm planning on doing with it. You should decide to do on your own whatever it is that you think needs to be done. All right, I just got to say that. Now, back to the alert. So the alert looks like this in my account, and naturally there are other things in my account that I just don't want you to see, so I have whited that part out. But anyway, once you click on that little spot that says you have the option to take action or to dismiss, so if you dismiss it, I want to say I've hit dismiss, and the thing didn't go away. It came back right here. So I clicked on take action, and this is what it shows me, and I'm going to move my face out of the way. It gives you the option to address the restricted data processing, and this is sort of where my eyes glazed over when I was looking at this, right? Because it's giving you these options, and it seems like it should be important, but I didn't really understand what the options were, what they meant, or why it was that I should care, right? It gives you two options to choose from to deal with users who are in California, that Google determines are in California. So it says, don't restrict data processing or do restrict data processing. You're like, okay, well, because of the CCPA, does that mean I have to click the box? I mean, if it were something that had to be done, wouldn't Google just do it for me? And I think the answer is kind of yes. But anyway, it gives you an option for you if you want to affirmatively go ahead and try to take extra steps to comply with the CCPA. And you say, okay, well, I don't know, do I have to do anything? Like, what happens if I do nothing? Does the CCPA even apply to me? Like, like, it just all went, whoa, like right over the top of my head. Let's do that again. Ready? Whoa, just like gone. So I was like, I'm going to take some time and read a little bit about this, because I don't really know what it is I'm even agreeing to. And so the first thing that we should figure out is, does this apply to me? Does this apply to my business? Does this apply to anyone else? And I have multiple websites, right? And I have websites that people land on those websites from around the world. I know what the traffic is. I know how much money I make or don't make, depending upon the site. And that's a pretty easy way initially to figure out whether or not you actually have to do anything about the CCPA. So the CCPA applies to companies that do business in California, and they meet one of the following criteria, one of the following things. One, if your business does business in California and your revenue exceeds gross $25 million, or you annually buy, sell, receive, or share information of more than 50,000 users in California, or more than 50% of your annual revenue is results from selling personal information. Now, if you go to random blogs and websites that talk about, whether or not the law applies to them or not, they add the words often that say in California. I think that there are, in the future coming up, going to be some revisions to the text of this legislation, of these statutes, to make these things more specific, because you could read it to say that any business, regardless of whether or not they The information that they're buying and selling is or isn't Californian may apply, but basically the way people are interpreting it is that the 50,000 users, for example, have to be 50,000 California users, and personal information of California users only. And also you may say, well, I'm not present in California. I don't do business in California. I live in England. I live in Australia. I live in Thailand. I don't do business in California. And I will just tell you that that pretty much has been settled by law here in the US. Just because you're not present in a state doesn't mean that you're not doing business in a state. And I would just say for website operators in general, if people who are coming onto your website are Californians, this is going to apply to you. I'm just saying that. I'm just saying you. And if you want to challenge it, that's fine. I would just err on the side of assuming that it applies to you if users are coming to your website from California. So if you are like a website that has very few users or even a lot of users, just in general, you're not going to have to worry about this. You really can't go wrong by this under this particular statute. Now you can go wrong of other legislation that talks about sharing personal information. Just because the CCPA doesn't apply to you doesn't mean that you just can't not take care of the personal information that is provided to you by your users, and that you couldn't be subject to a lawsuit like if you didn't take care of the personal identifying information. But as far as whether or not you are subject to the CCPA, this is aimed primarily at larger businesses, at larger companies. So if you are brand new, right, you just started your blog, you just applied for AdSense, and you're like, I don't know if this applies to me, I'm a small fish. Odds are that the CCPA is not going to apply to you because you're just not going to make enough money. You just don't have enough users coming through your website. And so this isn't something that you are going to have to worry about. And for me personally, none of my websites will fit in with this. Like I guess I don't have the joy or the luck or the honor at this point to qualify to have to deal with the CCPA. So for me, when I go back to, this place that says, restricted data processing, do you have to do anything in particular? For me, I'm not going to worry about this. I'm going to leave the box that says don't restrict data processing, because for me, the CCPA, it doesn't apply to me. Now, you still may want to just jump ahead and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and restrict data processing for people who are located in California, even though it doesn't apply to me. You could do that. For me, I'm not going to bother messing with it. So now that I have established that the CCPA doesn't apply to me, is there anything else that I should know about? And I think the answer is yes. We should always know what this stuff is, and so let's talk about it some more. You've probably heard of the GDPR, and you're like, well, how is the GDPR different from the CCPA? If I'm already working on being compliant with the GDPR, does that mean that I am compliant with the CCPA? And the answer is not exactly, not really. And if you are trying to comply with the CCPA by the letter, like let's say you just wanted to do everything that needs to be done even if you don't comply, then you have to definitely do more than the GDPR requires. Just some basic differences though. The CCPA applies to organizations doing business in California, while the GDPR applies to businesses that meet any of the criteria for the GDPR, which is operating in the EU country, the personal data is processed in the EU, or business offers goods or services to people in the EU. The CCPA defines personal information as relating to individuals and households. So, anybody who falls within the household and that personal information, the CCPA applies, while the GDPR applies only to specific people, specific individuals. Now, you may have never heard of the Cal-OPPA or the Cal-OPA. I don't know how people say that. I'm not on the acronyms. Okay, I'm not cool, but the Cal-OPA is another attempt by California to sort of get ahead and do some of the things that the GDPR does. If you are compliant already with AdSense and you applied for your AdSense account and you have your privacy policy and the terms of service and you already got applied for AdSense, the odds are that you're already compliant with the Cal-OPA. But basically some of the requirements of the Cal-OPA or that you have a privacy policy listed on your homepage, which Google AdSense does require, a link on your homepage with the word privacy in it on the homepage, so that takes people to the privacy policy so that they can go and read it. you know, and then it's not hidden necessarily. So in most cases, if you're complying with in compliance with AdSense, you're going to be pretty much compliant with CalOPA. Not exactly the same, but close. Let's see. Oh, and I just listed out what else. This is why I have a slideshow, because I forget where I'm at all the time. Under the CalOPA, your privacy policy has to contain a list of categories of the personally identifiable information you collect, the third parties who you share the information with, a description of the process that you collect information for, and the effective date. So now that we have covered, you know, whether or not the CCPA applies to you, and you may feel like, I don't need to watch the rest of this video. I already know that it doesn't apply to me. I'm out. We're just going to talk more about what it is and what it is about, and just help you understand a bit more about it, so that when you do click, you know, yes or no, or restrict or do not restrict, you understand what it is that you are doing. So the CCPA goes into effect January 1st, 2020. It was something that was, I think, voted on in 2018, and they've been making changes to it in 2019. It supposedly goes into effect January 1st, 2020, and enforcement, so far as we know, won't really even begin until summer of 2020, if then. It's a law that was enacted by the state of California, and so theoretically only California citizens, or people who can avail themselves to the benefits of law in California, are able to really enforce it, to bring any sort of action about it, to really make the requests that the CCPA allows them to do, you know, demanding the information. Or let's look at the rights. So that under the CCPA, you have the right to know what personal information is being collected, know what personal information of yours is being sold or disclosed, and to who. You can say no, you can opt out of the sale of your personal information. You can get access to it to know what, like I said, you not just know what personal information is, but actually request it. You can demand that they delete your personal information, and you also have this right to the equal services of the business, even if you exercise your privacy rights. So let's say you go ahead and say, I demand that you delete my personal information, and the business says, sure, no problem. We're just not going to give you access to our website, because our website, we collect personal information, so you'll just have to leave. And that isn't something that you can actually do under the CCPA. If someone contacts you and says, I don't want you to collect this information, you have to let them have, you have to have it set up so that they can still access your site without collecting that information. You should also know that the age of your users is important under this rule. So you can sell data about people who are 16 years or older unless they demand that you don't. So it's a situation where, assuming they're of age, you can do what it is that you would otherwise lawfully be able to do until they say no. If your users are between the ages of 13 and 16, you have to get them to give you permission to go ahead and collect and transfer their data under the law. And just, you know, like them staying on the page, like giving them the notification that says, you know, if you're 13 and you are going to stay on this page, we're going to collect and sell your data. And then they don't click on anything, they don't accept, they don't affirmatively say it's okay, then you're not necessarily in compliance. Like, just sort of silence is not affirmation. And then if people on your page, you know, they're 13 or under, you have to get consent from their parent or guardian to be able to sell or transfer data about them. So what are the penalties? You say, okay, I think this may apply to me, but I don't necessarily care. I mean, maybe it'll cost more money for me to get CCPA compliant than it would be to suffer a fine. So if you intentionally breach the CCPA, they could fine you up to $7,500 for each violation. And if you do it on accident, most likely you'll be given 30 days to correct the breach, which is kind of nice. You say, okay, maybe I'm doing this right or not. But generally, assuming what you're doing is unintentional, they'll give you notice before they go ahead and fine you, and that's $2,500. And you know, you should remember too is that most likely if you do something bad or wrong and the customer suffers damages, they'll probably be able to sue you anyway outside of the CCPA. So what does it mean to collect data? Under this, and again, like all of these definitions, I think are subject to interpretation and to and some vagueness issues. I think this is why this law, this statute, this legislation is going to be tightened up in the future. But Collects under the CCPA means buying, renting, gathering, obtaining, receiving, or accessing any personal information pertaining to a consumer. So this is information from the consumer, either active or passive, by just observing the consumer's behavior. So for example, if you use those the heat mapping software that tells you, what your customers are doing on your website, like where is the pointer going? Like, are they focusing on, the headline or the related post plugins or something? Like that is observing and collecting information about your consumers' behavior. What does commercial purposes mean? Because in general, all this stuff only applies in the sense that it's for commercial purposes. Well, I'm not going to say only, but the commercial purposes term is important. Commercial purposes under this statute means to advance a person's commercial or economic interests. I mean, the ones we assume, like buying stuff, right? Just giving you your money, but it also means potentially subscribing, like subscribing to your email list, for example, I think would constitute a commercial purpose, or opting into notifications. So it's just something to think about. It doesn't always necessarily mean money. What does consumer mean under the statute? It means a natural person who is a California resident. So it wouldn't mean somebody who was in Texas, because again, the CCPA isn't going to apply to them. So personal information. Wow, this is one of these places where the CCPA is much broader than you would potentially think, and that's why it's almost academically really interesting to look at this, because personal information is any information that identifies, relates to, describes, or is capable of being associated or linked indirectly with a particular consumer or household. So things like names, aliases, postal address, unique personal identifiers, online identifiers, like you think login information, IP addresses, email addresses, account names, some of them that are really obvious, like your social security number, but things like cookies, beacons, pixel tags, mobile ad identifiers, or other technology, a unique pseudonym, persistent or probabilistic identifiers to identify a particular consumer or service. Commercial information. Oh, get this, biometric information. Biometric information. So things like your DNA, your fingerprints, your iris, retina, all these scans that these phones are collecting now. Voice prints, keystroke patterns or rhythms, sleep, health, or exercise data that contain identifying information. I just think this is fascinating. Obviously we're used to this browsing history, search history, your interaction with a particular website, your geolocation information. Not only that, but the inferences that you may draw from this information that create a profile about the consumer regarding their preferences, characteristics, psychological trends, behaviors, attitudes, intelligence, abilities, aptitudes. You think about back when Facebook ads were really getting going, and you could narrow your audience for like purchase behavior, right? Like people who use credit cards online, or people who are likely to be interested in something based upon some other information. It's just really interesting. Some, really obvious examples. So if you're collecting email addresses in your sales funnel, this is going to apply to you, assuming the other criteria of the CCPA for the size of your business. If you're using cookies to display targeted ads, and that will apply to those of us who are involved in AdSense. So what does it mean to sell then that data? People say, oh, well, I use cookies on my website, but I don't sell that data to anyone. I don't get anything for giving that data. Maybe I just give it to someone, but I don't get anything back. I don't get any money. It can mean selling, renting, just releasing. So not necessarily, really thinking about giving it, but just making it available in exchange for monetary or other valuable consideration. And again, the term valuable consideration is something that is fairly vague. I mean, what does that mean necessarily? Does that mean, money? Does that mean some sort of other benefit to your website, as far as maybe goodwill or contract or promise or something? Nobody necessarily knows for sure what exactly that means in this context. So again, coming back to this, now that we have covered all this stuff, for most publishers, like most small publishers who are in the AdSense world, I mean, you're not going to worry necessarily about restricting data processing like we were talking about earlier, because this law doesn't necessarily apply to you. Now, you could get ahead of this and then just choose the restrict data processing option. And so we already know that Google understands where we are, and it's already using information to show us, to serve us particular ads based upon what it knows about us. So Google can, if you click this button, show only non-personalized ads to users just in California. Google knows if they're in California. And so Google can go ahead and get ahead of that so that you would be compliant. So you could check that box if you want to. But is just clicking that box going to make you compliant with the CCPA? Like, if you know that your business for the CCPA would apply to your website, is just checking that box enough to be compliant with the CCPA? And the answer is probably no. The CCPA rules require that your privacy policy is updated to include information about the CCPA that it requires. You have to actually affirmatively set up a do not sell my personal information page and link that on the home page. Users must be able to request do not sell without creating an account. You need to have a privacy policy and a link to the do not sell page in it. Now, if you're going with just straight AdSense and no other third-party sort of collection efforts, it could be enough, I guess, to say that you have your privacy policy in it, and then you say, we do not collect information for users in California. And then just let them know that you are, using AdSense, and that you have the option selected that users from California are not, there's just not an option for them to have their information collected. But in general, if you do know that your website does meet the requirements for this, it's something that I probably would go check it out. And I was looking for good examples of do not sell pages, and the elitesportsny.com do not sell my personal information page I thought was really, really high quality. It had a lot of information about it, and if I ever got to the point where I needed to have one, that would be a good place to go and look. So I see troubles ahead for the CCPA, and frankly, if we look ahead to what all the various states in the United States could do. So each state has the ability to create laws about this stuff, and potentially, because we don't have an overarching, federal law on data collection, you could see 50 states doing this all differently, which could be really a headache for a lot of us website operators who are dealing with personal information. We hopefully would have the support of Google and AdSense to help us do that, because we want to stay in compliance with them. But again, looking ahead, this just could be a massive, massive mess. We also have technical limitations, right? So let's say someone contacts you, and you're doing this on an individual basis. They contact you from, through email, and they say, I don't want you to collect information about me. And you say, okay, I won't do that. And you may or may not have the technical abilities to do that. And let's say this person was in California at the time, and then they traveled to New York, right? And they're using a computer from New York, and they are a California resident who has said, do not collect my data. And you say, okay, I will not. But then they access your website from New York. Does your website, does the technology you have actually have the ability to comply with your agreements? Can you not collect their data when they are not at an IP address that your system recognizes, or on a device that your system recognizes, or they're using different information, or just something else that you just don't have the technical capabilities to comply with their requests and your agreements? The same is true when you are using tools and services which collect data that doesn't give you the option to just not collect it. The thing that I think of specifically is that service called Repixel, where you can install a pixel on your website and then sell that data to a third party just passively, right? People just come there, and just get that pixel data so that they can use it for retargeting or whatever else? Like, do you actually even have the ability to control or to stop that for a specific user, for a specific IP address, for something specific? And I don't know that you can. So it's just really interesting. I think it's going to force people to grow and change as far as the technological capabilities. I mean, we're already seeing that the market is responding to this with goods and services to help you. Like, there's at least one group I saw that has already created a do not sell WP sort of plugin that creates the a widget for you to put on your page, or a banner or something with a button, and then they will create the template page for you so that you have your do not sell page, and they'll basically do everything for you. And because they're the only people on the market who are doing this, at least right now, they are charging what the minimum, like the small version of it is $10 a month, and it goes up to, I think, 45 for a larger group, and then up to what, $100 a month for a large website where it was managing the stuff. And it does more than just do the banner, right? It will actually, I think, help manage the information and the people who want their information to not be sold and the rest, or transferred. I didn't look at it because, beyond just sort of like cruising it, because it's not something that I'm going to invest in right now. But looking ahead, there are people who are going to have to do that. So anyway, the sum of it, of all of this, is that the CCPA doesn't apply to me, so I'm not going to worry about it. And for most of you, I think, who are watching this, you're not going to have to worry about it either. But if you do, what I would recommend then is you get out there and start looking more carefully about what it is that you need to do. And it's going to be more than just clicking on the button for AdSense, because odds are you are doing more than I am by just putting AdSense on your website. Think about cookies, think about what other services you may be utilizing, and you're going to have to check those out individually on a case-by-case basis. So this is, I guess, the 25-minute lecture on the CCPA, and I hope it was helpful. As always, if you got value out of this, please give me a like or leave a comment or something that lets me know that you got value out of this, and will also encourage YouTube to show it to other people. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.